Okay, well, I guess, why don't we get going, Amy, if you're okay with that. I think it's
Sure, absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
we don't want to, I guess we want to respect everybody's time, but so let's go ahead and get started. We have people from across geography here, so we certainly want to wish you either a good morning or a good afternoon, depending upon where you're sitting. And I don't need to tell anybody on the line here that obviously, you know, we are seeing some sweeping challenges in the staffing industry around things like candidate no-shows and high job refusal rates. And even though these challenges may have existed in the past, it just feels like some of the circumstances surrounding COVID-19 have just added an extra layer of complexity to all of those items. So thank you for joining our virtual roundtable discussion today as we talk about how to overcome some of these challenges. Advance the slide here. My name is Sheri Tischer, and I'm with TCI Business Capital. And for more than 25 years, TCI has been providing financing and back office solutions to staffing companies nationwide. I just joined TCI at the beginning of this year, and although I love what I do with TCI being a resource for the staffing industry, my heart's still my heart's still with the front lines of the staffing industry. I spent 15 years selling and recruiting, managing branches and operations within the industry. So I'm thrilled to be sponsoring and co-hosting this discussion today. Before getting into the meat of the conversation, just a housekeeping item, we do have a significantly higher number of people joining us today than we originally anticipated, which is a great thing. But because of that, we did decide to put everybody's video on, I guess, turn it off and then have all of you guys on mute. So what we do want to do though is still encourage a lot of participation. So if you have a comment or a best practice or a question, please enter it in the Q&A section on the screen, and we'll be tapping into those throughout the hour. We certainly want you to feel like you have your voice too. So I mean, if there is something that you feel like would be better to share verbally, raise your hand. And as you can see, I struggled unmuting Karen earlier, but I'll try to get to you and unmute you so your voice can be heard. So when we decided to host this roundtable and reach out to a staffing industry expert to facilitate this discussion, Amy Bingham was the first person to pop into my mind. A number of years ago, Amy and I worked together at the same staffing company, and she was wildly successful. She was very highly respected within the organization and in the industry. So not only does she have a number of years of hands-on day-to-day experience within the industry, but for the past almost 15 years, she's been working with owners and executives, sharing best practices, providing advisory services, helping them grow their business and increase value in their firm. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce and hand over this roundtable discussion to Amy Bingham from Bingham Consulting.
Thanks, Sheri. Boy, I'm glad I'm going to get a recorded version of that. That's a great testimonial. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And yes, I'm so glad that you reached out to me to talk about this issue. I actually wrote a blog post on the whole no-show thing for interviews. My clients are saying that primarily they're experiencing this because they're assuming that people are making more money on unemployment, depending on the staffing sector you're in, than they would be if they're going back to work. And I think there's a piece of that that's absolutely true, without a doubt. But what I want to do is take that, and as Sheri and I were talking about, getting a bunch of great minds on the phone, what else could we tackle that's also been a challenge? So these are the things she's hearing and the things I'm hearing, not just managing interview no-shows, skill marketing candidates to the client, teaching our people how to effectively do that to actually maybe perhaps obtain a job order or at least get a really good candidate in front of someone before a competitor does. Reducing refusal rates, we're seeing a lot of that still. Getting job orders during the pandemic, it's all hands on deck from a sales perspective, and then winning that business profitably. So those are all things I'm passionate about, and I work with my clients on every day. I do think we're in a really unique situation right now because we've got the whole, unemployment obviously went up into the double digits. Now it's settled back around 8.5%. So, and then that's not exorbitantly high. It's certainly significantly higher than what we were dealing with pre-COVID. But as Sheri mentioned earlier, COVID challenges have just added a new layer of complexity to what we do anyway in terms of getting people to work. So unemployment has come down, but we don't see necessarily that it's any easier to get candidates into jobs. We would think in years past when we go into a recession, that's pretty typical. Candidates abound and job orders are scarce. In the light industrial sector, you guys know better than I do. I know many of you are in it. You've got a full board of job orders. You just can't get people to go to work. So it's a really interesting dynamic. The typical supply demand, where we're either focused fully on sales and fighting our competitors for job orders, but we can fill orders all day long, is going on, or the reverse is true. We've been in that reverse situation where candidates are scarce for years now. So, this has upset our apple cart in a number of ways. One of the things that as I step back, I always like to take a kind of a macro view at this. We can't control what our candidates do. Heaven knows that we've tried to give them wake-up calls. We can't make people go to work. We can't make people show up for an interview. But I'm wondering, I've seen a little bit of, and it may be because the recruiters have just been working so hard over the years to get people into jobs. They've made their process so efficient that I'm not sure we're doing the upfront vetting. When I think about what can we control as an industry, what kinds of, and this is a question I would pose to you, what kinds of expectations is your recruiter setting with the candidate on the phone before the actual interview? So, I think about, I say all the time to people when I'm coaching people, we teach people how to treat us. So keeping the control of the process, setting up that expectation and determining first and foremost whether we should be spending time with this candidate. Is this candidate serious? I mean, that's the litmus test for many of us. And so I think we've got to set some expectations around that. So I think about when you've got a candidate on the phone, whether you actually fall in love with this person, want to bring this person in for an interview and are absolutely convinced you're going to place them in a job, or the reverse, where this is not a viable candidate, at least not for us. There are three things that I teach recruiters to get out of every call. This is either I'm quickly going to ascertain on a phone screen, this is a candidate now or the future, or for the future. This person is a source for referrals. This job may not be for you, the one I'm calling you about. We may have others down the line. Meanwhile, I've told you enough about the job that I'm calling you for to ask you if anybody else comes to mind. Who else is in your network that you might be able to get a great job? So the referrals, the lead generation that happens naturally as we're looking at resumes where we see, this particular candidate worked for this particular distribution center, and we know who has that distribution center. We know it's a very big MSP perhaps. We can ask that person who they reported to, and we can give a lead to the sales team. So there are three things we want to ask our recruiters to think about every time they're on the phone. So that's headline number one. That's headline number two. For me, headline number one is set the expectations. Control the process to the degree that we can, because we can't control their behavior, but we can certainly control ours. Get those three things out of every call. And then here is my suggestion for a very direct approach to a phone screen as a follow-up to what I said earlier in terms of setting expectations. We are vetting for seriousness here. So I'm going to ask a candidate, so just describe your ideal position. If it isn't what I'm calling them about, then it's a very good chance if I set a face-to-face, they're not going to show, at least not for the job I'm calling them for. So my filter is, should I be spending time with this candidate right now? And if that's a yes, great. What date do you absolutely need to be working? What's the drop dead date? That's a great question. If they're hedging and they say, well, you know, there might be another round of unemployment benefits coming, and okay, this person is probably not serious about going to work. This is that person who's trying to demonstrate they're looking for work. And let's call it what it is, right? But asking, when do you need to be working? If they tell you a month from now, and you're calling them about a job that starts Monday, okay, probably not going to be a high priority for them to show up for the interview, and nor should it be for us. If we offered you, I love this one, if we offered you a position like the one you described now, would you return to work? So guess what? You told me what your ideal position is. I have something within that ideal range. Are you ready to go to work? Can I count on you to come in? So a very direct approach. If your recruiters are not doing those things, that's the first thing I think I would work on to reduce the no-show rate. Let me go back and give my recruiters some talk tracks for how to get out in front of this no-show problem before it even starts, ideally. So now, having said that, we're going to take each of these questions one by one because I don't want to be talking at you for the whole hour. And Sheri and I promised we wouldn't do that. So what I'd like to do is ask you all to open the chat and chat with us about what are your best practices? What are you doing? I've got some more ideas up my sleeve, but what are you doing that's actually working for you? So fill up that chat panel.
Amy, while we give people just a second to do that, I have a question that popped into my mind when you suggested that recruiters use the interview process as a way to generate sales leads, right? I think that's a great idea. I've done that in the past too, but oftentimes it was hard to get that program moving and to keep recruiters consistently doing that. Do you have any suggestions as to how, we could consistently get recruiters to look for those sales leads while they're doing interviews?
Yeah, I do. So what I call my high performance clients, right? Staffing firms that are growing above market year after year after year. One of the things they do is they make that a metric, right? That's an activity metric. X number of leads generated for the sales team per week. So in their one-on-one with their recruiter, they're taking a look at that. Now, how do they know that? There's any number of ways you can capture the leads. Some, for some, it's even just a simple form. For others, it's an email. Others have an automated process for that, depending on the size of the firm. So track it as though it's a minimum activity standard and then measure it.
Okay. We don't have any comments or questions typed into the Q&A unless I'm being technically challenged right now, which could be the case. But so maybe, Amy, you want to go ahead and share your other, talk tracks regarding.
Yes, I will. Okay. So there's been a lot of good conversation around this on ASA Central. And people have some really good creative ideas. Most of them kind of, grassroots, nothing that is new, but maybe things we haven't done in a while. Things like adjusting your office hours. Okay, so if you're having a high interview no-show rate, it may be that it's not convenient for people to get to you. So consider extended hours, either early or later. Virtual interviews, even if you're in the light industrial space, if you're not doing that, you're missing out. While we've been in this horrible situation of, well, not horrible, but good for the country, but not so easy for us, full employment over the last few years, what I've been recommending to my clients is that, listen, you do that initial phone screen with someone and you do that fairly quickly. If they have time and you have time, go right into an interview. And since we now live in a virtual world, getting your recruiters comfortable with making that transition and going right into a Zoom video or Skype or FaceTime even, or some other application. My guess is we'll see plenty of options for this over the next year, beyond just Zoom and Microsoft Teams and others. But don't let them off the phone. Move right into the interview. So, solve that problem that way. So adjusting office hours, making it easy for people to interview with us. Having one of my clients had a virtual job fair. It was wildly successful. It was outside of normal business hours. It was virtual. They made it fun. They had a great turnout and they got some really good candidates out of it. So think about that.
And we did have somebody actually just type.
Oh, good. Yeah, we have a question there. Good. Yeah, don't be shy, guys, please.
Yeah. So we had somebody type in saying that they have done Zoom interviews and that's been successful. And then Blaine asked, yeah, has anybody had success using Microsoft Teams or Zoom to do virtual job fairs? And you just spoke to that. So it's that's been successful.
Awesome. All right. I see some more chats coming in.
Yeah. Yeah. Have a
recruiting blitz. Love it, Jay. That's my friend Jay out there, always commenting and providing great insight for the industry. Absolutely love it. Yeah.
I see Jay a lot with comments on ASA.
On ASA Central. Yeah. So Jay, Jay's talking about having a recruiting blitz, right? So we call it various things, power hour, right? The third tip I had on my list was just to get more candidates in general, to reach more people, is doing a database reactivation campaign. I have one client, it drove him crazy. He had 45,000 untouched applicants in his system. I'm sure if you go back and look, many of you have people who have staged themselves in your database, which means they've already applied to something. We may not know them, but divide and conquer and get your team on a phone campaign to reach those people. Jay also says open house, complete with cookies or pizza. Yep. Again, not necessarily novel ideas, but things that we have not done, all this grassroots stuff. I think the real issue is that we've gotten so reliant on technology to do the upfront recruiting work for us that we're almost approaching it, and I don't mean this universally, but I think as an industry, we're almost approaching it like an assembly line, right? So I don't know that we're really making the kind of connection with a candidate that motivates that person to actually come in. So going back to some of that grassroots stuff is really important. Mm-hmm. Suggestions on templates for a virtual job fair. Templates for a virtual job fair. I don't have anybody. Does anybody anybody on the call have a template that you'd be willing to share with the group? Blaine is asking the question. Mm-hmm. So if you do, and if it's something you can drop into the chat, we would love to have that. Mm-hmm. Linda, you've tried Zoom, haven't had a lot of success on the video interviews. What's the secret?
And it looks like it's more specifically with light industrial candidates that they've struggled.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise any of us, I don't think, that are in the LI space. I think we've got to, this goes back to educating the candidate. We have to get them used to this process. And I think it is initially going to be challenging. But I will tell you this, I mean, I'm sure there's data on this somewhere. People will pay their phone bill before they pay their rent in many cases. We're all just addicted to our phones. So FaceTiming someone even, if they have an iPhone, they're certainly familiar with that, or other apps that may allow you to make that easier versus Zoom.
You know, I agree with that, Amy, because then it might not seem so formal, or maybe, it might seem easier just to do it from the phone. I like that idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can't give any of my client secrets away, but I would say if you want to have a virtual job fair, what you want to think about doing is reaching your candidate base where they live, work, and play. So advertising it, giving some significant notice, generating excitement and buzz via social media, I think would be really important. How do I feel about asking unproven candidates for other candidate referrals? Yeah, that's a good question. To me, that's a game day decision. That's an in the moment decision. Am I going to pass the ball or not? If I'm talking to someone who sounds like someone I would place, then yes, I'm probably going to ask that question. If no, I think I'm just going to abandon that question. So that's part of the art of recruiting. That's the recruiter's call in the moment. And I don't think there's any science we can apply to that other than, you know, what is your, based on the short time you've known this person on the phone, what's your gut telling you about their, based on what you hear in their voice, their excitement level, intelligence, all of that stuff. People want a lot of details on the virtual job fair, and I don't have all the details. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do some research, and I'm going to figure out some of the best practices on that, and I will include them in my newsletter. It won't be this Monday, it'll be the following Monday. So I'm going to take that as an action item. You've done several drive-through job fairs for LI and got a decent response. Okay, so drive-through. So yeah, visualize when you go to pick up your food, right? During COVID, you're literally, it's a drive, kids grabbing and they do a car parade. Similar concept, I think, is what Greg is talking about there. So there's various creative ways to do it. Yeah, thanks everybody for your input. Sheri, what do you think? Should we move on?
I think move on. Yeah, Amy, you're starting to cut out just a little bit. I don't know what that's all about, but yeah, let's move on to the next slide. But I like the idea of circling back with more information for everybody on the virtual job fair.
All right. So can you hear me now?
I can, but it does still seem like you're cutting out a bit.
Okay, I must have an unstable connection. So I'm going to apologize for that. You know, the technology is a boon and a bane. So hopefully it'll stabilize in a moment, but I don't want to hold this up.
Yeah.
Selling candidates to clients. This starts again with recruiter training and how they submit. Now, those of you on the line, I know I have clients on the line. I've taught the recruiters this process. This is so simple. It's amazing we don't do it, but we don't. Rather than throw a resume into somebody's inbox and sit back and wait. Now, the hiring manager, the receiving individual of your candidate resume has probably got lots of resumes from your competitors, has a day job, has core responsibilities that have nothing to do with recruiting. And I know this because my husband used to actually hire IT contractors. And he would have to sit at night and sift through resumes because he didn't have time. All these people were submitting resumes. So take control of that. Don't give control to the client. That's what has us waiting to hear from a client. So whoever takes the job order, whether it's a recruiter or a salesperson, book a 15-minute window of time to review candidates. You can send the resumes in advance or not. It's up to you, but that's your opportunity to sell your candidate. That's going to happen when you get on the phone with your hiring manager client. By the way, you'll also take the monkey off their back because, and this works. I have workshops that I've trained people to go out and they do it and it works. People will, everybody has 15 minutes. So if I'm a hiring manager and you're going to make it easier for me to review your candidates by putting a 15-minute calendar invite on my calendar, you know what? That's great. I'm going to wipe the sweat from my brow. It's one less thing I have to worry about. And I'm going to go back to work. So that's a recruiter training issue. I just gave you a really good tip. I call it resume review time. And then they can, when they get the hiring manager on the phone, beyond what the story the resume tells, which we all know is not usually the entire story, then you can sell the sizzle of your candidate. Directly connect the requirements of the position with exactly what the client wanted on the candidate resume, but go beyond that and say, when this candidate was here, when I talked with him, I learned that he did this, that, and the other, created a process that made, the assembly line more efficient or made suggestions. That's what people want to hear. Is this candidate somebody that's going to impact my effectiveness or my efficiency in my department? So cite accomplishments. Job stability is a big one for light industrial. Good references, strong testing, all of that. You have to get on the phone to sell your candidate. If we're throwing resumes into an email, an inbox, then we've just given all the control to the client, and that's why we're frustrated. So, and then you ask the client for a commitment when you're on the phone selling your candidate during that 15-minute resume review window. Then you ask the client immediately, yes or no, would you like to see this person? He's available on this date between this time and this time. Let's go ahead and set it up and I'll put it on your calendar. That is proactive recruiting. So start with the training issue around that. Now I'd love to hear from others who have great ideas around selling their candidates to their clients. Charles says, in the recruiting world, I feel we are also in sales. Yay! Yes, you are a salesperson if you are a recruiter. Are we doing a good enough job to sell the value of our company and the company's culture and history? I think that's a good point. Yeah, why does this candidate want to entrust his or her career to your firm? So they first have to know, like, and trust the recruiter. They can get over that hurdle. And the part of how they do that is when the recruiter talks about why they want to work for us. Our retention rates, they point them to social media, to fun posts that we put up. People want to see it's a good culture that they're getting involved with here. Even though they're not going to see their staffing team every day, we are the employer. So talking about our values, our history, benefits, those are all great things to weave in. So your takeaway from this is, let me go back and again, talk to my recruiters about adjusting their behavior so we get better results. Do we set that 15-minute the day after we open the order, or what is the time frame from which you set that appointment? Okay, so I think what you're asking, Karen, is if somebody places a job order today for Monday, and if you're in the light industrial space, if you're in any space, you're probably going to want to see candidates, one or two at least, within a 24-hour window. So 24 hours is a good rule of thumb. I've had some clients tell me, are you crazy? We can't get somebody in 24 hours. We're in the engineering space. Engineers are hard to find. Okay, then maybe you need a few more days and your client knows that because it's a tougher skill set to find. But anywhere from 24 hours later to a couple of days, I would at least have a check-in. Even if you don't have a candidate, you still get on the phone and you give your client an update. You say, we've screened 15 people, we screened 8 out. Of the other 7, we've got 3 interviews set up. What does your client now know? They now know we've been working on their behalf. By the way, they haven't paid us a dime yet. And we've already put this upfront work in. So contrary to what they think, candidates don't grow on trees, and we can't just submit people right away. We have a lot of upfront work to do. So hopefully that answers that question. Anything else on selling the candidate to the client? Anybody have any tips or questions? Okay, Bob, creating a pick list of candidate criteria to potentially include in conversations. I love it. Recruiter must prepare which points they will comment on prior to call. I like that. So if on your pick list, Bob, I'm the candidate and I have 4 of the 8 attributes in a significant way, those are the 4 that you're going to check to talk to the client about. Am I understanding that correctly? What a great idea. Be sure you speak to issues that are highly pertinent to the client's job and culture. Having a consistent discipline in doing this will yield solid results. 100% agree. Thank you, Bob. Angela, when you skill market a candidate, what's the number of follow-ups that you would deem reasonable? So follow-ups. I'm assuming that you are saying you didn't get this candidate an interview, but it is a hot candidate and you know this company uses that skill set. I think I'm going to try to hunt down another hiring manager and skill market that candidate who's perfect for my client, and I know it. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try to find another hiring manager. If that doesn't work, I'm going on to client next, client B. So I hope that answers that question. Anything else, guys? Good comments. All right.
Amy.
I think that's it. Jay, selling the candidate to the client. The real issue is removing the need to even have to do that. The challenge is how to get the client to the place where you can connect the candidate with the assignment without client approval or interaction. Yeah, Jay, you're making a really good point. Some of my clients call that go to works or immediate. We used to be able to do that years ago. So right, Sheri, remember those days when we could actually screen a candidate and send them to work?
We called that fill and bill.
That's exactly what we call it.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can get out in front of not having the client interview by suggesting that it's going to be easier on everyone and cite your performance guarantee or whatever, that is the real issue. So good point. All right. And I know we've got professional staffing firms on the line too. So
yeah,
generally,
one thing that we did, Amy, when we were doing professional staffing, direct search, it was really effective if a client called in an order for an engineer, for example, or an accountant, we would commit to having, say, 3 candidates, ready to go for them to interview on a certain day. So we give ourselves an agreed upon amount of time, whether that was a week or 2 weeks or whatever. Then we would preset interviews with that client for that day. It would force the recruiter to have to perform, right? Because now we've committed to the client, we're going to have our top 3 candidates for you for this position on Monday the 28th, right?
Yeah, so you're putting a stake in the ground. Yeah, yes. I love it. And if your client,
exactly.
So you ask your client if they're willing to do that. Again, your sales message to them is, this will be far easier on you, Mr. Hiring Manager, because you have a day job and it's not recruiting. So let us do our work, what you're paying us to do.
Right.
Give us a window of time, and then we will be in a situation where everybody wins.
Yes, and then we did not present the resume. We didn't go through that battle of, I'm going to submit my resume to you and you can give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down. We just committed to having our top 3 candidates for that engineer at their doorstep on
scheduled.
And then we might present the resume like the day before or the day of, so they'd have a little time to prep for the interview, and then we would show up. Now this is pre-COVID, but we would show up then and facilitate that interview process. We would greet the candidate, we'd introduce them to the client, we'd wait for the next candidate to introduce them to the client, and then we'd be able to get immediate feedback from the client.
That's in professional staffing. You can do it in light industrial. It's going to be a lot easier though in professional staffing. Cindy is asking, what happens when the candidate doesn't show up to the interview? That's the $64 million question. We all, right? This is why we're in this crazy business, because we can actually deal with things like that.
Right.
There's no magical answer around that other than you can't control human behavior. We apologize, Mr. Client. We've done everything possible to get this candidate here. He or she made a different decision. So moving right on. Just recover quickly.
Yes.
That's all you can do.
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Okay.
or topic rather.
Okay, yep, let me,
We're having some issues forwarding slides, I think.
yes. It's me, it's not you.
Let me see if I can, oh, reducing job refusal rates. Once again, the poor recruiter, if you're a recruiter and you're listening to this, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I am the person that they're blaming all this on. Well, no, but when we step back and take a macro view, if we're having job refusal rates, it's probably tied to, again, we think about what we can control, how we're making the job offer. So are we selling the job to the candidate? Just like we sell, I mean, if we call in a very monotone way, say, okay, you start in the warehouse at $15 an hour on Monday. I'm going to send you an email with all the details. And if you have any questions, just call me or send me back an email. That doesn't excite me about going to work. That doesn't excite me about accepting the job. So very artfully, they have to be taught how to make the job offer. I like to draw on what we learn from executive search firms on this. The search industry is as artful as it gets in our business. Why does this position meet all of the candidates' requirements? You take them back to their ideal job, because remember, you ask them, what's your ideal job? This meets 9 of 10 of that criteria. On that 10th criteria, given what I've offered you, is there anything holding you back from accepting? We know that there's 1 point missing. Is that enough to have you refuse the position? So in professional staffing, I think about things like percent of remote work versus on-site, candidate willingness to relocate. In light industrial, it might be location that comes up. Well, it's a little bit further than I want to go. You know, I mean, I have a friend who works at the place right next door and I could ride with him. I don't have a car. You know, they're thinking through how they're going to get there, right? Happens a lot. If that is significant enough, then this candidate isn't right for the position. But I think you've got to go back and tie the benefits of this position directly to what the candidate said they were looking for. Pay rate and location are probably at the top of the pay, location, and type of work are going to be at the top of the list. Anything there to add, Sheri?
No, but we do have a question. When a candidate refuses a job offer, any suggestions for getting to the real reason while they're refusing the job? Like, can we ask about unemployment status and things of that nature?
Yeah, so
we're seeing a lot of that now with COVID-19 and the, the additional unemployment dollars.
So I'm going to first issue my consultant disclaimer. I am not an attorney. However, Sheri and I discussed that very issue when we were putting this together. And the concern, while I don't know, it doesn't appear that there's a federal law that prevents asking somebody if they're on unemployment. There are laws. There may be laws at the state level. There are laws about discriminating against someone who is collecting unemployment. So I think that's a very slippery slope for you. My recommendation would be that you not directly ask. You might ask a question like, gosh, you've been out of work for a while, it must be rough. We've had this thing going since March, it's still going. How are you making ends meet? They might volunteer that. And then I'm going to say, they might say, I'm on unemployment. Okay, well, okay, all right, so that's how you've been able to make ends meet. So at what point, what is your drop dead date for having to get back to work? What is that date? And get them to commit. That's going to give you a little more leverage there. But I would stay away from the direct question. That's my guidance there.
Okay.
Anything else on job refusal rates?
Nothing in the Q&A, Amy.
Okay. All right, but I also like this question. Given what I've just offered you, is there anything holding you back? This is once again I'd rather hear bad news early. Okay, if I'm a recruiter calling someone to accept a job, I don't want someone saying yes and hedging. because yes and hedging really probably means no, and they're not going to show up. So I think sometimes in our excitement to get people into the job, we ignore the red flags. And I think you've got to ask some very direct questions there too.
Okay. All right. Do you feel like we should move on to the next question?
Yeah. Now we're talking sales, right? So getting job orders during the pandemic, again, very unique environment right now. I know if you're in the light industrial space, unless you're in hospitality or some niche that has really taken a hit, I feel very badly for my hospitality clients. They're having to pick up and, strategize about entering an entirely new vertical. So, but if you're doing, if you're serving logistics companies, anything that is in that essential workspace, you may have more orders than you can fill, which is unusual for higher unemployment. But again, no one's ever lived through a pandemic. We have an interesting condition here. But if you don't, what I'm working with my clients to do is first recover, get back to pre-pandemic levels. Now that may be through your existing client base, it may be through new business development, but that's the first goal. Then we want to seek sequential improvement week over week. If this week is better than last week, great, things are moving in the right direction. How does that happen? More job orders, more choices. Maybe we have a whole board full of job orders that are not fillable. If that's the case, then we have this illusion that we've got to do a lot of recruiting when in fact we've got a bunch of, junk on the board in terms of unfillable orders, maybe way below market pay. That's usually the first criteria, or not an employer of choice, bad reputation. There could be numerous criteria, but this starts with who the salesperson targets. So here's what you do. You go where the business is today. If your sales team is chasing big enterprise accounts and you're a small to mid-sized firm, and those enterprise accounts, they're beating their head against the wall trying to get in, and right now those enterprise accounts are not hiring, even contractors right now, they need to pivot and go elsewhere. So I note here that it's essential businesses. Google is your friend. Google industries in growth mode in my market and skills in demand. I guarantee you're going to get technology and healthcare on that top 10 list. So you can be pretty sure if you're knocking on the doors of any organization that supports healthcare or technology. So even beyond just hospitals and clinics, suppliers to the healthcare industry, huge. Back office functions for healthcare. So think out of the box. Go where the business is, go where it's gonna be. And it's gonna be primarily in logistics, technology, and healthcare in the future. So find that open position, hunt down that job. I see you have an open position. We have great candidates. Best reason for somebody to talk to you. They have a need, you can solve it. And their position's been posted for a couple weeks. I have no idea where you are in the process, but let's connect. And then the structured touch plan is critical. Salespeople, what makes salespeople good at selling also makes them lousy, generally speaking, at planning and structuring a process. We just don't like that. So if you hand a salesperson a touch plan and you say, here's what you do on this date, you do this and you say this. 3 days later, you do this and you say this. They can't help but be successful. And I have many stories around that. I have a touch plan that I'm extremely proud of, but this is not a sales pitch. But I leave you with that. They have to have a touch plan, grassroots. So you're doing the marketing automation stuff that's bringing you leads through your website and social media. And then your sales team is hunting and pecking for those job orders, just like we always have, but in a very structured way. Okay, we've got something. I'm planning to add her for salesperson. Any tips on getting them off to a great start? Yes, put them on a touch plan. Before that though, make sure that you know how to hire a salesperson for the staffing industry correctly. And if you want to reach out to me individually, I'm more than happy to set up a call with you.
Amy, don't you also, like when I think about, sales right now, I think more than ever, it's critical to make sure that our sales team and our recruiting team are working synergistically. So often, I mean, you've got salespeople going after certain, job titles and they're trying to get orders. And then you've got salespeople recruiting candidates, and as owners and leaders, making sure that they're working together properly. At Kelly Services, we put in place, we called it our 6x6 strategy, but I mean, you could name it what you want and, tweak the strategy how you want. But we had, as a team, we would come up with 6 job titles or skill codes that we felt we were really good at. This was our target. These are the jobs that are hot right now. We're good at this. And we would have those 6 job titles that the salespeople would target. Now, it didn't mean that they wouldn't bring in orders in other skill sets, but these were the 6 that we'd really focus on. Then on the flip side, our recruiters would commit to having a bench 6 deep of each of those skill sets. So,
I remember that.
Yep. So it gave the salespeople the confidence to know that they could be out there selling, because after a client asks you how much you charge, what's the next question they ask you? How soon can you get me a person, right? And so if a salesperson is out there and they have the confidence that at least in those 6 job titles, my recruiters are going to kill it, right? They've got a bench of people, then, and same thing with the recruiters recruiting those skill sets. They've got the confidence that the salespeople are going to be focusing on getting open orders. And so just having that flow, and I think for agencies or firms that are already in a niche, your business model is kind of set up for that to begin with. But like at Kelly Services, when we were more of a general staffing firm, it's so easy to just go out and want to get an order in any skill set. Well, then what's the salesperson going to do? They're going to bring a CNC machinist order for 3rd shift,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And then the recruiter gets upset, and we're always mediating tension between the recruiting team and the sales team. Yes. And this is a good way to mitigate that, to get out in front of it. So you're kind of backing into who you should target based on what I like to do in strategic planning with firms is what skills are we really good at? Like you said, where do we kill it?
Right.
Let's capitalize on that. I mean, I worked with an IT firm years ago in the Bay Area, an IT contract staffing firm that said, the CEO was fairly sizable too. I think they were about 30 million. CEO said, I want to micro niche us. That's what, those are my words, but that's what he meant. We're really good at business analytics and one other skill, I can't remember, but that they basically, he said, I know it's a huge risk, but I want to walk away from business that we don't fill as easily and focus on those. And the last time I talked to him, it was, I mean, they had tripled their growth. So that can be a very, very good strategy on numerous fronts. Yes. To, like I said, mitigate the infighting that can go on. Same goal, right? Recruiter wants to make a placement, salesperson wants to make a placement, but different responsibilities to getting there, and a lot of opportunity for frustration on both sides.
Right.
So I love that. I remember hearing about that program, actually. I think we tried to steal it.
Yeah.
You probably had some people stealing it. What other comments on getting job orders during the pandemic?
I don't see anything at this point, Amy. So I think unless we want to give people a minute to type, we could move on to the next.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay.
We're coming up on time, so we'll. Yeah. Winning profitable business. This is about setting, in essence, the kind of short version of it would be establishing for the owner or sales leader to establish what's our desired gross profit and what is our floor, under which, and most of you probably do this, what is the gross profit under which a sales rep is not allowed to price without approval. So that's a best practice. I think you got to start with that. What's your desired GP? What is your true cost associated with putting that skill in that job. So beyond just statutory costs, you're going to think about a lot of other things, including the recruiting horsepower that's going to be needed, healthcare, other things that are ancillary things that we take for granted, and make sure that your payroll burden reflects the real burden. So there's a couple different things, but it's really planning. I was also asked to comment on, as we always hear, particularly in light industrial, but in professional too, can you meet the other supplier's bill rate? If you can meet their rate, I'll give you a shot. Okay, so you're not going to say this to the client, but you're thinking, what is the definition of insanity? This customer is not happy, so I'm going to come in and replicate the same thing for the same price and be more successful. So you have to have that conversation. Remind the customer why you're having the meeting. Why are we even talking? I think we're talking because you're not happy with quality. So if you're not happy with your quality, it's probably connected to your price. And you have to remember that staffing firms, all your suppliers, the ones you're using now, they're all in business to make money. So if they have you and they have another client that needs the same skill set for a higher margin for them, that's where their resources are going. So you may be seeing a decline in quality because it's the old, you get what you pay for. That whole conversation that I just had is a training conversation with the sales team or the recruiters if they take the orders. So, and then they also need your permission to walk away. Sometimes salespeople, they just think they've just got to scrape the bottom of the barrel to bring in, the orders. And the reality is no one's going to be successful with that. So set them up for success by, targeting the good business, giving them a GP, an understanding of pricing, GP floor, and our desired GP. I'm actually leading a training on that this Wednesday. If anybody wants the information, please shoot me an email. But that's what it starts with, teaching them, and then teaching them how to sell against price. Otherwise, they bring in more bad business, and nobody's happy, and we have turnover. And so I know that we've all experienced that story. What other, objection. I often get the objection, I'm happy with my current provider and I'm getting a great rate. Okay, if you could change one thing about your current provider, what would that be? Mm-hmm. So turn it around and ask a question. That's the first thing that's going to come out of my mouth. Great, I'm glad you're happy. You see the value of staffing. You feel the price is fair. Good for you. We're having a great conversation. If you could change one thing, what would that be? What else, Sheri?
Well, I guess the one thing that pops to my mind with this question is finding out which departments that current provider is helping them with. Like in asking that question, and we learn that this provider that they're talking to is only helping them in the warehouse with manufacturing. Maybe find out that there's an opportunity in the office or with some professional staffing. Maybe there are other skill sets that we could help them with that this provider isn't good at. And
right. So you can pivot any number of ways, but I think when you are met with that objection, you turn it around and you ask a question, and it's always open-ended. And there's a number of ways you can take that conversation. But what you don't want to do is roll over and accept that bad business at a low rate.
Right.
Unless you've talked to your owner or, manager, boss, and everybody agrees we're going to try this because the volume is there, and we know that story. So, but they do need your permission to turn down business that we know we're going to lose money on. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would leave it there. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Anybody have anything?
I don't see anything else coming in, and actually the timing's probably perfect because I think we are just creeping up on 1 o'clock. So we can go ahead and be respectful of everybody's time and close out the meeting. But certainly if you have additional questions or comments or anything that you want to touch base with Amy about, I've got her contact information up here. on the screen. We will be sharing the slides and a recording of this discussion as well. If there's anything that I can do to help you with funding or back office support with your business, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at TCI Capital. My contact information is now up on the screen. And we just want to thank everybody for joining our conversation today. Go get an order, fill an order.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for your participation. Have a great week.